Hello, everyone. This evening we're going to continue our discussion on extraordinary biblical women. We've gone through several, and last week we talked about Jochebed, which is Moses' mother, as well as Miriam and Aaron's mother. And tonight we're going to cover Moses' sister, Miriam. And next week, Lord willing, or the week after, we may do two. I think we'll probably end up doing 2 weeks of Miriam. And in the next lesson, we will cover um, Zipporah, who is Moses' wife. Miriam is a very important person in the scripture, and she is known as a great leader of Israel. There's several things that we need to remember about Miriam. We're just going to think about probably a few this evening. Like I said, we might go on and talk about her a little bit next week, and then again we might be able to conclude the lesson this evening. I'm not 100% sure. So, Miriam was born around 1576 BC. Again, she is the daughter of Amram and Jochebed, as Moses and Aaron were. The Bible describes her as a prophetess. There are prophetesses in the Bible. There are both prophetesses in the Old Testament and the New Testament. There are several in the Old and a few in the New that are named. Um, We learn of Sarah, who is considered a prophetess by the Israelites, Deborah, Hannah, Abigail, Esther, and Huldah. So today we're going to talk about Miriam, and obviously a female prophet is somewhat different than a male prophet for many obvious reasons. She was the oldest of her siblings. She was about 5 when we see Moses being born, and Aaron was about 3 when Moses was born. Unfortunately, however, Moses was born during a very difficult time, as we talked about last week, for the Israelites, the Israelite slaves, as the Egyptian Pharaoh commanded that they should kill all of the baby boys and let the little girls live among the Israelite people. And so I lost my train of thought. I had to pause it there. I'm sorry about that. So when we think about Miriam, first time that we see her is when she is very little, only 5 years old, because that's how old she was, obviously, when Moses was born, and they could only hide him for about 3 months until they realized they couldn't hide him anymore. Now, the thing with Miriam at first is, we mentioned this last week, that when we talked about Jochebed, is that Miriam, Aaron, and Moses had parents that were very faithful to God, and their faith guided them to make life decisions. And she saw that. And so when we see Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, these 3 siblings that lead God's people out of Egypt and into the wilderness, and lead them through the wilderness, and all 3 of them die obviously before they enter into Canaan, into the Promised Land. But what we see are even though, despite them making mistakes, all 3 of them, we see the reflection of their parents in them, and of course Miriam was no different than her brothers when it comes to this. When we first see Miriam, she is caring for her baby brother. She stands by and she watches to see what's going to happen to him. And of course, there was a plan in play. When Miriam sees the princess of Egypt draw her baby brother up out of the water, she goes over and suggests that she find a nurse from among the Israelite women. And of course, she goes and gets her mother, Jochebed. And of course, we know then that Moses will be taught the ways of God, even though he is being trained as an Egyptian prince. Now, some other things that we learn about Miriam happen when we see her much later, and that, of course, is about 40 years after Moses leaves Egypt. I remember she's 5 years older than Moses, so when Moses leaves Egypt at the age of 40 after he killed the Egyptian taskmaster, that puts her at 45. She will not see her brother again for another 40 years. So she'll be 85 years old when she helps Moses and Aaron lead the Israelites through the wilderness and out of Egypt. God is able to use people at all stages of life, and perhaps that is not made more clear than in anyone's life in the Bible than Miriam, who God used when she was just a very little girl, and who He also was able to use when she was a much older person, um, well past the age of what we consider retirement. And even then, people would have begun to slow down, but not her, not her brothers. They were going to continue to do what God wanted them to do, even though Moses was reluctant, to say the least. Um, Let me see here. When we see Miriam, a couple of different things that we see is Exodus chapter. Another thing that we see out of all the other things that we've already talked about is the song that she leads the Israelite women in, and that's found in Exodus chapter 15, verses 1 through 18. So let's go ahead and read that. Exodus chapter 15, 1 through 18. As you're turning there, you remember that she, with all of the other people, had seen the great miracles that God had performed in the land of Egypt. She witnessed the plagues as the rest of them had done. She has seen the pillar of fire and the cloud following or leading the people, and then of course standing in the way between the Egyptians and the Israelites before the Israelites are destroyed and taken back by the Egyptians. And then of course the she sees the parting of the Red Sea, the crossing of the Red Sea. And at this time, when she leads the Israelite women in this song, they have been completely liberated from Egypt. God has destroyed the Egyptian army. We will not see them. In fact, God had told them, the Egyptians that you see today, you will see no more ever again. So Exodus chapter 15, verses 1 through 18 is the context of that song. Let's see, this is the song I told you, Exodus 15, 1 through 18. I told you it's actually the song of Moses. So let's go down a little bit further, and then we'll see that. Okay, so the actual song that we're referring to here, the Song of Miriam, is probably actually combined with the Song of Moses, and that is found in the 21st verse. It says, "And Miriam sang to them, sing to the Lord, for He has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider He has thrown into the sea." Obviously, she's talking about the destruction of the Egyptian army after the Israelites went by on dry ground. It says that Miriam, the prophetess, in verse 20, the sister of Aaron. It's interesting that he refers to her as the sister of Aaron and does not refer to her as the sister of Moses, but as a sister of Aaron. She took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and dancing. So what we see here is not just singing. She's leading the women here in song, and they are dancing, a celebration of the victory that God had secured for them in this situation. Obviously, a very happy and celebratory time. Think about all the things that they had seen, all the hardship that Miriam and the Israelites had gone through. We talked about that a good bit last week. The things that the Pharaoh had done to them, both he and the new Pharaoh, his son. And here God has come through and delivered them as He had promised that He would do all those years before. Now, of course, someone might say, I've mentioned a couple of different times Miriam alongside her brother Moses and Aaron. And so someone might say, well, why are we giving Miriam any credit for what obviously was Moses and Aaron? Really, the reason that we want to do that is because the Bible itself gives Miriam credit right alongside with Moses and Aaron. If you turn to Micah chapter 6 and verse 4, God reminds the people there, "I brought you up out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery." Now notice what He says to them next. "I sent Moses to lead you, also Aaron and Miriam." And so God Himself gives Miriam props, if you will, for the deliverance that she was involved in with her brothers. We don't know a whole lot about her being a prophetess. We don't know exactly what role she played in that situation. Um, it is believed that as Moses and Aaron taught the men the law of God, that Miriam led the women and taught them too. It shouldn't surprise us because when we turn to the New Testament, we see that that's one of the roles of women in the church is that the older women are to teach the younger women the ways of God, specifically how to love their husbands and how to do the things that they are to do in the home, which is the role that had been given to them. Not everything was good for Miriam. In fact, at one point, she and her brother Aaron become very jealous of Moses for whatever reason, and she becomes angry. They also are irritated that Moses has taken a wife from the Ethiopians, a Cushite wife, as some translations will say. So we don't know the full extent of their aggravation. I have heard some people say that this is a lesson here because obviously Ethiopians have always had dark dark skin, um, and Moses and the Jews, of course, were not fair skinned like the folks from Europe. They would have been darker skinned, but they would not have been of the same race, I suppose. Although we're all just one race, we know that the Israelites descended from Shem, while the Ethiopians would have descended from Ham. So when someone, and I've heard, and this isn't that big. I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but I've heard people say this, usually trying to discredit anyone else for whatever reason. But they'll try to say things like Moses was black, or um, you know, Jesus was black, and that's not the case. They didn't descend from Shem, or they did descend from Shem. They didn't descend from Ham. You and I, if as folks that are white, we may have different genes as well over the many centuries that we're not aware of. But our ancestor from Noah was Japheth. So we understand that when people say those things that Moses was black or Jesus was black, or even someone saying that they were white, while we're all one race, when someone says stuff like that, it usually comes from a strictly political reason because they're trying to somehow use Jesus or use Moses and other people in the Bible to say that that they are superior to other people, and that is far from the truth with any of us. We're not superior to anyone. I don't know that we can actually make a case, as some have said, that this is an anti-racist situation. That they were mad that Moses had married a dark woman. There's nowhere in the context that says that. I don't know why they were upset, but they were upset about it, and God punishes Miriam. And she must have been the ringleader. He doesn't do anything to Aaron. In fact, though Aaron was going along with her, he strikes Miriam down with leprosy, which shocks Aaron and Moses pretty badly. And Aaron begs that the leprosy be taken away, and Moses turns to God and speaks for his sister, hoping that God will take it away. And God said, "Yes, I will take it away, but not in any way that goes against what I've already said in the law." She's gonna have to go through what people that have leprosy is going to go through. Even he said, even if her father had spit on her, she would be unclean for several days. So she's going to go through the steps that I have given, the law that I have given in regards to uncleanliness when it comes to leprosy. And so that became a thing with Miriam as well. After the situation where she complains about Moses and gripes about his wife, we don't hear much out of Miriam again. She lives another 38 years, and we never again see her raising any questions against Miriam. So we can safely assume that she had an attitude adjustment, so to speak. Now, She was probably about 130 years old at the time. Uh, some say 130 years old at the time of her death. However, if we do the math, if you ever come across that, I don't know that it matters too much, but if you do the math, that doesn't seem to be quite right. She couldn't be that old because she's only 5 years older than Moses. Moses dies at 120. So I have read. In fact, when I was studying for this lesson, I did come across someone saying that she was about 130. I wrote that down and then realized that didn't make sense because she's only 5 years older than Moses, who died at 120. So she couldn't have been more than 125 years old, probably a little bit less than that. We do read about that death in Numbers chapter 20 and verse 1, and immediately after that we read that the Israelites had no water. And so a lot of folks do try to make the correlations in the context that there's something going on here. Um, I'm not sure if there's anything that can be said. Ancient Hebrew, from what I've been able to gather when studying for this, ancient Hebrew texts and experts do explain that um, that it had something to do with the lack of when Miriam died, then the water dried up. I don't know if that can actually be said or not. We don't really have anything in the context there. It's probably likely just something that grew into a story, an addition. That's where we're gonna go ahead and leave that. They give us all these things that we read about about Miriam gives a glimpse into her life. What we do see out of Miriam is that she, like her mother before her, had great courage. She stood, even as a little girl, she displayed incredible courage to see if the princess would like her to find an Israelite woman. Um, and so we want to take that example, teach our children to have courage. We want them to step out in faith, as Miriam did. Psalm 27, verse 1, we want them to realize that the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is my stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? In Deuteronomy chapter 31 and verse 6 says, be strong and courageous, and do not be afraid or terrified because of them, the enemies of the people at that point, obviously, as they go into the land. Moses was reminding them, God is with you. He says, for the Lord your God goes with you, and he will never leave you nor forsake you. And so we want our children to live with that same kind of courage, knowing that God is with them and that there's nothing really to be afraid of. Another lesson that we see is we want to be, we have brothers and sisters. We want to do the best to be a good sibling. Um, Even as a child, Miriam had a sense about her that she felt protective over her brother Moses, and we can assume that that would have gone over into feeling protective over Aaron as well. Um, I myself had two brothers growing up, and I remember I'm the middle, although uh, my oldest brother, was 9 years older than I was, so that not only did I have that feeling of being in the middle, I was also, to a degree, I felt like I was an older child as well. I had a younger brother. I remember my older brother was very protective of my younger brother and I, um, even when our parents got irritated with us, he would be there to sympathize and try to encourage us even in those situations. If someone was picking on us, he would try to stick up for us. Of course, he was a lot older than my younger brother Nick and I. He was 12 years older than Nick and 9 years older than me. And then, of course, I felt very protective of my younger brother, and my younger brother felt protective of me. There was a little boy once. I was, I think, in the fourth grade. I remember this kid's name. I'm not going to share it with you. But I remember this kid's name, and he picked on me something fierce. We were on the school bus one day, and he got up and he pushed me down and kept me down. I wasn't really one for defending myself too much at that age. My little brother, who was in kindergarten, stood up to him, and he pushed him down because he had that feeling of protection. He was protective over his brother. Um, Now that I'm having my family of my own, I've love to see my children how they may pick on one another, but at the same time, if someone else tries to pick on them, then they forget all of a sudden all of the grievances that they have with their brother or sister, and they defend them and they stand up for them. I think that's a part of being a good sibling, and that's part of the courage that we see with Miriam. I'm sure that you've seen in your own families as well. Hopefully, we continue to teach children to do the same kind of thing, not just for their families, but to stand up for one another, and but also to gently correct them and try to help them um, get back on the right path if they get off of the right path, not just as children, but as adult siblings, that they hold each other to a higher standard, as Paul says in Philippians chapter 2 verses 3 through 4. Do nothing from rivalry or conceit. A lot of times children, especially siblings, will have rivalry amongst themselves. We call it sibling rivalry. Paul says, do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but to the interests of others. And so we want to be like Miriam in that situation. Now, she didn't always follow that. We talked about how she made that mistake and it cost her for a while, and she was shamed with leprosy. We want to make sure that we're always thanking God for each and every blessing that we have, as well as our trials. Um, we don't usually think about thanking God for our trials, but our trials make us who we are. Imagine all of the blessings that Moses and his family had, that Miriam had. We don't know anything of her children or her husband, but or even if she had them, but how difficult it would have been to live as a slave. And yet, because of their life in slavery, that trial, that made all of them who they were. And so when God delivered them, she was able to sing and exhort the Lord because he's highly exalted. He destroyed their enemies in the sea. Um, we want to learn from the example. A lot of times people go through just a little bit of struggle. And we all know people who have gone through a lot of things, a lot of difficult situations, losing their entire family, losing all of their children, just losing one child. It's so easy for them to become embittered, losing a spouse. I mean, just name anything, losing their health. It's so easy to become embittered. And God understands that. But we also have examples of people that show us that you don't have to get embittered. You don't have to become angry. Just put your faith in God that he'll get us through whatever trial we are in, and we'll come out as we know that all things work together for good to them love God and them that are called according to his purpose. God made a big statement on that day that he delivered the Israelites from Egypt. Paul says, give thanks in all circumstances, not just our blessings, but our trials as well. For this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 18. We also see, obviously, that Miriam was a leader. As Christians, we follow Jesus, but also as Christians, we are in a unique position to be leaders, not the kind of leaders that we see in the world. We don't want that kind of thing. In fact, Jesus says that's not the way things are going to be done in my kingdom. In the Gentiles world, they lord it over their subjects, but not you. You're going to serve them. That's the kind of leader that Jesus teaches us to be, and that's the kind of leader that we want to be. Miriam was a leader, and she was someone that others wanted to look up to and to be around and to follow. And there's a lot of people who claim to be leaders in this world, but not everybody wants to follow them. If we follow Jesus, we're going to be the kind of person that people are going to want to be around. If we really follow him, people are going to want to be around us. If we look to Jesus, people are going to want to follow us because they'll see that our life is going in a different direction than the world's life, than the world is offering. How do we interact with others? Are you the kind of person that people want to be around? Are you the kind of person that others might want to follow to Jesus? Or are we being bitter and angry or bossy with everybody? Miriam wasn't the kind of person to just sit back and watch things happen. She didn't just accept that her brother would be found by the princess. She wanted to make sure that he was found by the princess. She wasn't just going to be there in the background silently supporting her brothers Moses and Aaron. She was going to be right there showing her support for them as well. We want to be that kind of person. Titus chapter 2, Paul says to Titus here, likewise, teach the older women to be reverent in the way they live, not to be slanderers or addicted to much wine, but to teach what is good. Then they can urge the younger women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled and pure, to be busy at home, to be kind and subject to their husbands, so no one will malign the word of God. Women have the ability, a unique ability, to lead other women. Something that sometimes we forget. There are things that men just simply cannot teach women, and there are things that women simply cannot teach men. Women have the ability to teach women by the experiences that they have that a man never has had or ever nor ever will have. Women can lead other women in a way that men simply cannot, and that's what Paul is referring to there. He's telling Titus, teach women how to be godly, and then they in turn will teach the younger women how to be godly as well. That's about all that I want to talk about. We're almost getting close to the half-hour mark for this lesson. I've got some other things that I want to pull out from Miriam's life that we will talk about next week, Lord willing. We'll talk about how Miriam also how we can learn to use the gifts that God has given us for His glory. Miriam did this, and we'll also talk about a couple of other things, how to learn from our mistakes as well. I appreciate everyone for listening this evening. Again, I hope everyone is doing well, and we will talk to you all later and see you soon. God bless and bye-bye.